Alright, so I'm making a video today, so hopefully we can get through the lesson and you can then work on your assignment, but I can also work on getting caught up on the grades and the comments for the report cards, because this is the end of the 9 weeks, this Friday. In this video, we're talking about aquatic biomes. We talked about the land biomes. Well, this just means water biomes. That's all aquatic means. But there's two different main categories of aquatic, and then each of those have several different categories that we're going to look at and mention. So my two main categories are my freshwater, which we have around us, and then our saltwater, or our marine, as is mentioned in our book. So if I start with the freshwater, then that has subcategories. In the freshwater, I'm going to talk about streams and rivers first, and each of those are different. So I'm going to focus on streams, and then we'll get into rivers. So when I talk about streams, at the top of mountains, when it rains, water begins to run off the side of the mountains. In big mountains, then I have snow that's going to begin to melt and begin to drip and trickle into these little itty-bitty creeks. And these little itty-bitty creeks then come together to form streams. Those creeks and those drips, they're called headwaters. It's where all major rivers begin. Teeny tiny little tributaries, which is the name for a river and small stream, that come together. So when I look at it, we're talking about smaller areas, slower moving water. Plants can actually grow through the water because it is shallow and slower moving, and therefore I have small little organisms and critters that live inside of there. If you've traveled anywhere, especially around the mountains, like with my mom and dad's area down in Tennessee, you can find all of these little creeks and streams on all sorts of places. I don't find the big catfish and the lake trout and the bass and things in those because it's not big enough. It's not deep enough for them in order to survive. And they don't feed off of the plants. What you usually see is like salamanders and frogs and toads and little minnows and little tiny fish and your crayfish or your crawdad. When I look at the rivers then, rivers is just the opposite of a stream. Instead of moving slow and shallow, it's going to be a lot of water. And it's where all these streams are coming together to form bigger paths. So I have more water, deeper water, and it's definitely moving harder. And these organisms are designed in order to withstand these large currents and even these rapids. You can find fish that are swimming inside of them because they are designed to withstand that type of hit. The frogs and the little minnows that were in the stream, they can't survive all of that pressure being knocked around like the big fish can. So we have big turtles that will be swimming in your rivers, and otters, and there's a giant river catfish. These are salmon. They like to swim upstream to their spawning grounds. So we're talking about organisms that are designed and adapted to live in faster flowing water. My next level of fresh water then is the opposite of the moving water. It's still water or standing water. And when I talk about that, then I'm talking about ponds and lakes. And those are subcategories within themselves also because they are different from one another. So when I focus on ponds then, ponds are going to be shallower water. Now, when I say shallower, 10 feet seems really deep to all of us. I sink in water, so 10 feet is definitely deep for me. But it's considered shallow because at 10 feet, the sunlight can still get through the water. And that's really what breaks the classification between a pond and a lake. If the sunlight can get through the water and plants can grow at the bottom of it, then it's considered a pond. When it gets deep enough to where it doesn't have the plant life able to grow in it from the bottom, then it's considered a lake. But it often is going to have a mud or a muck bottom, and the mud is just what it sounds like, wet dirt. Muck is the decaying plants, animals mixed with the mud at the bottom of a pond. It usually gets to be, a foot or two pretty deep and slimy. We've all seen ponds in this area, I am sure. Some in front of houses and decorative areas, but some people have them in their backyards or just naturally on their property. A lot of people in this area just put a pond in because they want a place to just go out and fish or sit around with their family. But we have all sorts of critters that will survive in there. Generally in a pond, you're going to have bluegill or sunfish, catfish. You may put some bass in there, but smaller fish, they're not going to be able to survive out in the big areas. But you definitely have the bullfrogs and your geese and your ducks and your turtles and things like that. When I look at a lake then, it has some of the things that are the opposite to a pond. A lake doesn't allow that sunlight to go all the way to the bottom. it's deeper, and therefore instead of mud or muck at the bottom, I usually end up with a rocky bottom or a sandy bottom, and it also allows for a larger organisms inside of it. We can have some huge natural lakes, and out in Colorado you can get some beautiful lakes out there. We have down at Raccoon Lake, which is a big lake as well, in different areas around there like Rocky Fork. But they allow bigger organisms to survive inside of them. You have your lake sturgeons and your pikes, your bass smallmouth or bigmouth. They will have catfish as well because they're the scavengers of fresh water, and they will clean up the bottoms. You can get some large lake snails too, like big ones like the shovel fitting into your hand. And we also have lake mussels. So they're natural water mussels compared to the oysters and clams that you find out in the salt water or the marine. So then when we look at the marine section, it breaks down into categories as well. So fresh water is all fresh water. It's water that I can boil and drink. The marine water, it has salt water in it. So in the salt water, I break it up into a couple of different sections when I talk about the ocean. Okay, so we're not going to focus in on like the Gulf of Mexico, which is a gulf and not an ocean, or estuaries where they mix together. Just looking at the marine part of it, we have what's called the intertidal zone. Intertidal means part of the day it's inside of the tide, and the other part of the day the tide goes out, so it's exposed to the sunlight. And we have organisms that have to adapt, and a lot of times they have crusty shells on them, or they're going to dig down into the sand to be able to do that because they have to stay moist. When I look at these areas the tide is out. During the day when the tide comes in, they would be covered. Notice the color change in the rocks. So when the tide is in, these lighter colors are under the water. The darker color is what's exposed to the air. All of this area gets covered with water. When I talk about the organisms that can survive there, starfish like this area. They like to spend some time in the sun, but notice they stay close to ponds. So they climb up on these rocks and they expose themselves, kind of like a turtle does, right? But then when it gets too dry, it begins to go down into these little puddles of water. Crabs love this area. They'll dig down in the sand when the tide is out, and when the tide comes in, then there's all sorts of food particles floating around in that, and they start eating and pulling the food in. So we have barnacles, and we have also the mussels that attach themselves to the side of the rock formations. They can withstand that sudden change in the waves and the crashing of the waves, and then they just open up their mouths and they begin to suck in their food. The next section, when I leave the intertidal zone, then I'm talking about the first section that is always underwater, and it's called the neritic zone. It's often just referred to as the Continental Shelf because there's a sudden drop off when I get to the edge of it. It's the section that when you go out into the ocean, you're looking and you see kind of, a lighter color, and then all of a sudden it gets dark. The dark is the drop off. You don't want to go there. Okay? So all that section before there is the neritic zone. This is where you're going to find your coral reefs. This is where I enjoy spending my time. That's why the tide today. Okay? But this is where you would snorkel and scuba dive. It's also the section that you'll often find sometimes the shipwrecks or at the very edge of the continental shelf before the southern drop-off. And you can do some explorations under the water. But we also have a new level of variety of organisms, a vast variety of organisms. It's often compared to or referred to as the rainforest of the ocean because of the variety of organisms we have there. And we have a big jump in the predator versus prey organisms that survive there as well. A lot of them will blend in, or they'll find their niche in how to survive in this area. But it's absolutely beautiful, the colors that you can find down there if you ever get the chance to go snorkeling or scuba diving. This would be a lionfish, a sea turtle. Sea turtles like to eat sea anemones. They like to eat jellyfish. They like that soft thing because they are not a carnivore. They are an herbivore. So they will eat what they think or looks like plants. But like I said, with adapting, the clownfish will protect the sea anemone from other organisms coming in trying to eat it, and they dart at it. And at the same time, organisms that try to eat it get stung by the sea anemone, so it has a mutualistic relationship. You also have your seahorses and your sea urchins that survive in this area. a variety of organisms and colors that you'll see in this area. It's absolutely beautiful compared to the next step. The next step, kind of scary, because you can't see what's underneath you. That's called the surface zone. It's 200 meters down. It's from the top of the water to 200 meters, which is deeper than most people can dive unless they're licensed to go into the deep sea. But it's beyond the continental shelf. So this is the narrotic zone where the continental shelf is, and then this is where it gets dark as you look out at the ocean. There's a sudden drop-off. This top zone where some light can get to, the light comes through, is where most of your living organisms survive. But you can't see what's underneath you, and you can't see all the way to the bottom of that 200. It's not really comfortable to be out there snorkeling stuff when you don't know what's underneath you. When I look at the organisms, and I have a wide variety of organisms out there as well, from small fish that swim together in pods to gigantic fish that would scare the heebie-jeebies out of me if I ever came up on one of those critters. They're very docile and they like people. They visit people a lot, but they're bigger than people, and they are pretty intimidating, I would think, if you swam up on one. But we have all sorts of fish that people like to go out sport fishing for, from the marlins to the stub-nosed fish. This is where your sharks are going to exist as well. The sharks swim out here and live out here, but they do come in here and feed when they get hungry and they're not finding food out here. This is where your big jellyfish are going to be. Your small jellyfish would be in your narrotic zone. Your giant jellyfish are going to be out in the ocean. You don't want to tangle with one of those. And then that's also where you're going to find the majority of your whales, even though whales can also dive super deep. But you have a wide variety of types of fish that are designed for that pressure as they go deeper into the ocean. Smaller bodies up here because there's not as much ocean pressure. Bigger bodies out here to withstand the pressures from the ocean. When I get into the scary world, which I don't ever have a desire to go into, that's the deep zone. There isn't any sunlight that gets down there. If you see images, which I'm going to show you, that where you can see underneath the water, it's because they have a light with them. And most of the images that we have from the deep zone are because people have sent robots down there. Because we can't get down there unless we're in a submersible, and that submersible can usually hold 2, maybe 3 people at a time to go all the way down. It is below 200 feet below sea level. So we're going all the way down to the bottom of the ocean in really deep places where only submarines can withstand the pressure of the ocean. You get further down, we don't have anything at the very bottom trenches of the ocean that we can create, as of yet with our technology, that can withstand all that pressure. It just implodes. It gets crushed from all the weight of the ocean. These organisms, they adapt themselves in order to survive all of that massive pressure. And it's true that there are things down there that we have no idea what they are, because we've never been down there. We're talking about this deep section right here, even the trenches that go down to the magma inside the ocean, but it is deep and it's black, and the only light here is from the light of the submersible that's down there. It is pitch black, and you don't know what's coming towards you or what you're even close to. This is where your giant crabs are predators, and they're going to eat anything that falls that's dead to the bottom of the ocean, and they eat it up. But they're scavengers. They clean up the bottom of the ocean for us. So are these things. They look like giant, giant pill bugs. And when I say giant, they're about this big, where our pill bugs are this big. These things are massive, but they are scavengers. When a whale dies or a shark dies or something dies and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, that's what they eat, and they clean it all up for us. You have your giant squids, which are very few that have ever been photographed. This was photographed by an ROV, which is an underground remote control submersible vehicle. This is your Dumbo octopus. They didn't even know about this until a few years ago, that it even existed. But with our technology advancing and being able to go deeper and spend more time down there taking photographs and videos, we're finding more critters. This is a blobfish. Very few have ever been caught, because when they come up, they basically fall apart. They're designed to withstand the pressure of the ocean, and when you take that pressure off of them, they just kind of fall apart. They can't hold themselves together. So you have these giant critters that are down there. This is one of those anglerfish, scary things off of Finding Nemo, where the light's there, and then Dory almost gets eaten. So they have what's called bioluminescence. So bio meaning life, biology, right? luminescence means light. So they have a way of creating their own light, just like a lightning bug does, or a firefly, whatever you want to call it, lights up at night. They have bioluminescence also. So that is all of our marine sections. Now, there's the estuaries and things like that where the manatees are because they need saltwater and freshwater mix. So we do have a couple of other ones, but we don't really get into those in 6th grade and in our book. Now, your assignment's going to be up here in front, so grab it. You have about 10 minutes left in class. Do it. If you have any questions, please let me know.